What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
And on this episode of Educate Everyone, our conversation with Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson continues. She's the William Clay Parrish Jr. Professor Emeritus at the University of Virginia and a leading expert on differentiated instruction, a former public school teacher and Virginia's 1974 Teacher of the Year. And in 2023, she was ranked among the top curriculum scholars shaping public education discourse. Now here's Dr. Tomlinson and Dr. Atman.
I think that a lot of how we are informed about being human beings actually happens and takes place through our education. We learn about the world and what it is, where we as humans fit into it and what we're doing to impact and influence it. Now, that being said, I think we don't do nearly a good enough job within school actually identifying individuals' place. And as you mentioned a number of times, like finding meaningful tasks, but not just within the classroom, a meaningful life that an education could help you to find. I don't think we do nearly a good enough job in providing that for students. But the weird kind of thing right now is that we have all these ideas about what AI might be able to do. And it's funny because pretty much every conversation that I have on this show and all throughout folks within every echelon within academia, everything kind of routes back now to AI and to this big question of how's that going to affect everything. A question I think I have for you and something that you said is that it has the capacity to transform every aspect of schooling. So how, in your mind, would AI be outside of these well-constructed and meaningful tasks that you mentioned? Well, what do those tasks look like? How does AI transform for the betterment of students and of teachers? How does it transform every aspect of schooling? If you could project, I know it's hard to prognosticate something like that, but if you could wave a wand and say, this is how it should be, what does that look like?
I don't imagine it's going to be just one line. It's probably not that neat. But I think I can see 3 or 4 ways that things could change. There will be some people who take to AI and, oh, this is really cool, and I want to try this, and now I'll do this with the kids. But for me, when you have teachers who are so burdened with trying to raise test scores, which honestly, by the way, have not improved in 40 years. If they were getting better all the time, you'd feel like there's something there for that. But if you look back, we really have not made progress in all of that time. And part of the thing back then was when the earliest stages in that started happening was that kids who are already oppressed by society for economic, racial, religious reasons, whatever, need that the most so that they can have an opportunity to really stretch and become who they can be. And not surprisingly, those groups have been probably hurt more by this stuff that we're doing than most other kids would be, although I'd make the case that it's damaging to everybody. But I'm going to go back with you for a long step in history, and I'll try not to stay there long. When I first got to the university in early 1990, I just happened to run across in the library, when you still went to the library to look at pieces of paper and stuff, a study called the ACOT Studies, Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow. And by that point, I had been teaching for 20 years and doing a really lot of work with schools and teachers in various places. And one of the things that was always puzzling to me was the reticence of teachers to reach out and say, ooh, I really want to try this thing, if the thing seemed to have any meat to it. If it was a gimmick or, I could plug this in on Monday, then yeah, let me have this. I want a copy of that because I can do that Monday. But I couldn't at that stage in my career figure out what it was you did to help us think further. And the ACOT studies had been out for a while then, but when the computers first came out, Apple, of course, was really eager to get those computers into classrooms and tried selling them and,
Sure.
and sometimes donating them to schools. But nothing much was happening with them. They sat in the back of the room. They were paperweight, just not catching on. And so ultimately they chose some schools that were going to create Apple classrooms of tomorrow and sent computers, but they also sent human beings with the computers who were going to spend a good bit of time over the years working with teachers who volunteered, I think, for the most part, to be the pioneers in that experiment.
I remember those folks. I think I was in a preschool or kindergarten class, right? It was not my teacher, and we would have 15 or 20 minutes with that individual. We were pulled out of class, and you were with that individual working. Just they were kind of just showing you around the computer. You do a fun little game or something. I remember that distinctly. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
So what the folks who were there as the mentors, the coaches, the guides, found out was that they were thinking about things that Apple computers could revolutionize, and they could, not in the way that AI would, but it was highly revolutionary, as you probably remember back then, some of the things you could create or the speed with which you could do things or share things or find information.
Sure.
But they were not getting results that matched the aspirations they had. And so they found out, really, in a short version, that the patterns we have in our head of what a teacher has to do, the place of a kid in a classroom, the need to cover a curriculum, not as badly as with the pacing guide, but I have this textbook and I have to cover it, were embedded in people's practices and psyches really deeply. And so what they did was to begin to work with teachers, I'm simplifying it, but looking at those teachers' next steps. What if we just tried a little bit of this? And, a teacher's next step in room A is not the same as room B. And what they found was that there really was a series of transformations that the teachers had to go through. One of the biggest ones was trusting kids, to believe that kids could do something independently with good guidance, or that they could learn without the teacher standing over them, or that the teacher was not being a poor teacher if kids were working as though they didn't need her at that moment. But what they found was when they could help teachers walk that journey, the teachers evolved, and you could see it, and you could see them moving from step to step. So I think we're at that point now where something, and used as a part of something, AI could be helpful with that journey. But I think we have to have places where some teachers who do see kids and are empathetic and who have been granted the right to do something more than cover the pacing guide, or where the principal really spending so much time with the teacher's in deep trouble that the others can sort of go on their own a little bit, that those teachers say, we have to do something different. Let's at least try it. Let's get some of us to try it and see what happens if we teach like this thing we might imagine in our head. What have people done in places and times that really invigorate kids and that help them get really psyched about the gift of learning? So I think the teachers who are stressed and see the vision, have something that they really want to do and are hungry to do it, can be change agents. I think some things that may happen in society or may not might help leaders who, by the way, I think are more cemented in those things than even the teachers are, say we need something radically different happening here, and we need to go back to what our profession knows. What is it that we say is high quality curriculum? If we look at any document that governs middle school or that represents middle school or high school or preschool or science or math, what does it mean to teach conceptually? What does it mean to have kids debate, to look at answers and figure out where they come from rather than regurgitating them back? How can we find some of that? I think the leadership to make that happen, whether it's at a national level, which seems really dicey right now, but maybe that'll get better, or at the local level or the school level, is a way that we can move forward. And certainly we need people who, in a public way, and I think your work with podcast, as well as no doubt work you do with educators, provide some examples, some things to think about, some ways to crack that door just a little bit. But my sense is that it will take a restlessness in some teachers. It will take something that causes us to take a deep breath. And it could be that AI becomes so scary that we feel like we have to help kids some way or other prepare for a world, which we're not now, in which that kind of uncertainty and radical transformation happens, and in which they have to be able to analyze conditions around them to survive and to thrive. But again, looking at old stuff that we have, like the ACOT studies, and trying to do some stuff like that with professional development and saying, how do we sit down together and figure this out? Not that somebody in the top has to tell you, but that we ask teachers, when are your kids excited? When do your kids want to not leave the class when the bell rings? And let's see what we can do to make that happen. I want to tell you one quick anecdote. At the university, I guess I'd been there probably 8 or 10 years. One of my doctoral students was looking for a dissertation topic, and very young himself, probably too young to be quite at that stage yet, but didn't have a topic to anchor on. And he found a group of researchers in Virginia who were looking at test scores in the state. And he noticed when he was looking at them that there were schools whose demographics would predict that they were having trouble. Lots of kids learning the language of the classroom, lots of low-income kids, lots of places where there were stresses in home lives and that kind of thing. But in a few of those schools, the demographics didn't predict the results. In a few of those schools, the kids seemed to be doing quite well on the standardized tests. And so his dissertation question was why? What makes the difference? And he had a bear of a time with that, because anything he would think, well, maybe it's this, he'd check it out. It wasn't really that. Some of that might be there, but that didn't seem to be the thing. And what he finally discovered after interviewing many, many leaders and teachers was that the only significant difference they could find in those two outcomes was that in the outcome that they predicted, the leaders kept saying, okay, this test, you got to get it up. You got to get it up. Teachers, you have to make that happen. We're going to encourage kids. We're going to send home letters for parents to talk up the test scores. We're going to feed them breakfast every day for the week before the test. We're going to have a celebration when it's over. Just keep on that test thing. And the schools where the kids were doing markedly better, the principals, for some reason that I don't suppose anyone understood, or maybe it was just common sense or a bolt out of the blue, said to the teachers, we're not going to work with test scores this year. We're going to spend a lot of time together. We're going to spend extra time working. But the question that we're going to ask is, what does really great teaching look like? And we're going to try to get closer and closer. And that was what made the difference, as far as anybody could tell. So maybe some of those bolts out of the blue come. Maybe some inspired leaders say, let's not keep doing this. Let's try aiming at what our knowledge as a profession tells us works the best. And maybe that's one of the lines to get there, too.
I love that, because when you're focused on the question of what can I do to be my best, rather than trying to obtain some really, honestly, obscure goal that's not something that you yourself put forth for yourself, right? You're trying to hit a standard, you're trying to hit a quota, you're trying to hit a metric that was put in place by some bureaucratic form that no one really cares about, that is just there for, you could make an argument for almost like dystopian reasons. And another question is that I'll ask you here in a moment is, do test scores really matter? But I think it's such an interesting insight. And I think you were very wise when I asked the question, what's AI going to do? What does it look like? I think you're wise to say, well, who knows? But whatever form it's going to take, like everything, it's going to come through this grassroots sort of movement where disenfranchised people in some way, or people who see an urgency, right? It's people who really are identifying the actual crux of the problem. So many people, this is very cliche to say, but it's so true. So many people, the symptoms, not the disease. And I think in education, we're far too frequently focused on the symptoms. And the real crux of the issue is we're not focused on maybe always necessarily being the best educators that we can. And again, I don't think that this is the fault of teachers. I think this is the way I think this is the way we have set this whole thing up. And we're not asking the question. And I think that's so genius. That was one of the outcomes of that whole situation, is when you focus on the question, and you can apply this to almost anything, I think, in life. When you focus on the question of what do I need to do in order to be my best at fill in the blank, you don't have an answer. And that's okay, because you're there to discover it. And you're there to find out what works best for you and for those who, and this is a really important part of this, who you're serving. And I think, again, so many people who get into education, they're service-minded folks. They're, again, those good-hearted, heart-forward people who want to help others. And so when you focus on the question of how do I do that to the best of my ability and forget about everything else, the good stuff happens. You hear coaches say this a lot. We're not worried about the Super Bowl. We're worried about, the next opponent, right? Do your particular job. Focus on what you need to do to improve. It, again, seems like real simple, again, almost cliche level kind of knowledge and sayings, but it's so true that if you just focus on the actual crux of the problem, the actual question of what do I need to do to be my best or to best serve those folks who I'm here to work with and to help out, everything else will fall in line. And again, that's not what many educators are able to do given the way that we've set this whole thing up. So with AI, who knows? But I think what we need to do is, as you wisely sort of pointed out or at least alluded to, we need to just work with it and ask, how do we work best with this for the best possible outcomes for people, for teachers and students alike? And then let the answer, as they always do, present itself in its own natural accord and timing.
I'm concerned enough, which I'm sure you are, and I think many people who know something about AI, I'm concerned about the possibilities that it will upend society in so many ways. I've read some articles where people make the case, people who are fans of AI make the case that it's the great leveler, that a person who's really, really creative can get access to AI, which mostly you can anywhere now, not quite, but that will be, I guess, the case. And so they can do really amazing, dramatic things using AI and not have to establish corporations. And you can kind of see that through social media now. But its capacity to play tricks on us with deep fakes. I'm getting really tired of Facebook telling me about these amazing movies that are coming. They aren't coming, they're just made up. And you've got the poster and the actors and the whole 9 yards, but it's not real. It's not going to happen. And I get
really, I haven't seen that. Interesting.
Saw one today. I mean, this is too detailed for what we're talking about now, but I saw one today that was talking about the series called 1924, which was an offspin of Yellowstone, and this was advertising season 4, and it talked about what was coming in the next chapter and how dramatic changes in the people's lives were going to be. And somebody who was writing in said, this can't be real because those two characters on the poster died in the series last year.
Right, yeah.
You look at that and you know, oh, yeah. And I'm seeing that just a really lot with a variety of things. But my concern is that now we know that our students need to learn to be thinkers and problem solvers and users of data and wise questioners and skeptics and all those things, so that they don't get scammed and caught off guard. And we're not doing any of that. So I'm hoping that in some way AI gives us enough of a heads up in time to be able to say, my kids don't have a clue what to do with that kind of information. They have no idea how to attack back at it or integrate stuff or make decisions or observe things that seem off. And then you add that to COVID and to their concerns about climate change and their concerns about social media and what happens both for good and for bad with that. They just are kids who need to be using their minds and their creativity and their energy in ways that excite them and help them believe that they can solve the problems of the world rather than trying to raise a test score. And that's the end of my sermon.
I think you could probably make that a series of talks about why it's important to, again, think about all of that stuff, especially as it pertains to, again, the traditional ways in which we have gone about the business of education. I mean, it's why I got into the field of work that Middle Tree, the organization that I founded, currently does, is because it really is all about education reform. And I think that so many people get into education exactly for that reason. And that is to say, to reform education in some small way. And yet then you're hamstrung by so many things once you get into that field. But again, I think you could do a whole series of sermons on why that maybe isn't what we should be focused on so far as those traditional ways by which we've gone about this business of education. So that leads me back to my question for you, is that you said that in the past 40 years, test scores generally have not improved. So actually, maybe it's a two-part question. So why is that? I mean, it's a three-part question. Why haven't they improved? Can we get them to improve? And then maybe most importantly, should we even be trying? to get them to improve? Is that even an important thing at all?
So I'm going to start there and work backwards just a little bit. The standardized test is, our right answer test. You fill in one circle. Is it A, B, or C, or D? And the vast majority of it, in terms of information, is factual, just facts. And as it happens, the brain doesn't take a whole bunch of facts and make meaning out of them. It has to have a process of making meaning and seeing purpose and connecting it to their lives and interests. But it's the lowest common denominator. It has to be just facts, easy to score, and that's the bottom line. Even with math, which does worse most of the time instead of better than other subjects. I'm going to show you the algorithm, and I want you to practice the algorithm, and then we'll move on. Had a school leader tell me the other day that they were working hard with their teachers to do the I do, we do, you do thing. And she said that's the way they're teaching math. But the problem is the teacher does the I do part. The kids do the talk to the teacher and try something out, by telling the teacher stuff. But the bell rings before they ever get to the you do thing. I do it myself. And even if you go through that process and the algorithms are going by you so quickly, the chances that many kids are going to just wrap around that and get it are small. Jay McTighe has an analogy that he uses that I'm very fond of that sort of really answers your big question there, does it matter? He said, we've gotten to the place where we have forgotten the purpose of going to the doctor's office. You go and the doctor does a physical and he says, you're great here, but you need to work with this a little bit. And it's important that you do this and that because you'll be healthier if you do. And then the theory is that we go home and we do that. The theory is not always perfect, of course, but that's the idea. What's happening now, he says, is that we practice for the physical. We don't live well, which is what the purpose of the physical is, and then go in and see how we're doing. We practice for the physical all year long. And sure enough, I had a neighbor who a month or two before her physical every year goes out and walks like a crazy person and then does nothing for the other 10 months, but it will look good when she goes to the physical. Those, I would argue for you that you cannot have creative or complex thinking or anything that's really meaningfully done in the world without basic information. You can't think without something to think about. So it's not saying basic information and skills don't matter. It's saying we're practicing as though that is the life-saving thing, and it is not going to do that. We look back at the thought that we were going to do 21st century schools. Sorry, but we're a quarter of the way through that and haven't done anything about that.
Right.
And no reason to think that at the 50-year mark we will have, and yet that's what we should have been doing before that century moved on. So I think, to me, the test scores, because of their outsized influence, do more harm than good. Do I think kids need to learn basic information and learn algorithms and how to use them? Yes, and I think they do that, some by practice, but also by using them with something and creating something and figuring out which approach is going to work better for this. So it's not that I don't think it's important to know stuff. Clearly it is. But if it's all about cramming it into heads, we don't understand much about the brain or don't learn very well from our history.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Multi-step directions can be overwhelming for many students. A great habit is turning instructions into a simple checklist before starting. Each step gets its own box to check off as it's completed. This helps students slow down, stay organized, and feel a sense of progress. Checklists reduce mistakes and build independence. And kids love the satisfaction of checking that final box. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Joe, 2 words. How? Why? You are so very clearly fixated on how and why and the connection between them two. Help me figure it out. Why is this such an obsession for you?
I said I wanted to keep talking about this because it is so important to understand that distinction. Mentioned sort of in previous segments, most people are looking at the how of things, the mechanisms that allow for a thing to be, which is great and that's fine and super important in so many ways. And yet, when we unpack and get to the actual understanding of why, we see so much. It tells us so much about the nature of so many other things. Just a simple example, we used it before, is you can kind of look at Like, how does a car engine work? Well, you can kind of take it apart, put it back together, understand it, but then you say, well, why is a car engine there in the first place? Well, car engine is there to facilitate an actual car, a vehicle that is framed quite literally around the engine. Then you put passengers in there and you can transport. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, so you can get to places more quickly. Well, why do you need to get to places more, right? So once you start to unpack the why of things, you start to understand so much about the nature of what we're doing just in general and how we have positioned ourselves within this life, within being, within phenomena, within our own relationship to ourselves and the world, which we've argued again and again on Educate Everyone is really the point of education itself, is we want to understand what our relationships are to ourselves, to the world at large. So this fixation on how versus why is really important, because how kind of begs at how a thing becomes, where again, why begs the question of why a thing is. And that's so important. So there's this usefulness to that question of why just as much, there's so many details embedded within the how, but I would tell you that the universe unpacks and unfolds itself when we can arrive at this answer or start to even explore the question more in depth of why. Why usually happens only after how kind of becomes a worn out instrument. How is, it's super easy, right? It's this recollection of a happening. But why is a much more difficult thing. We frequently stray away from approaching it direct. And when we ask why, we're hoping for an understanding, and not an answer, but the answer itself. And answers are always the pursuit, and they frequently come from a feeling or an experience, and we can take something away, and from that takeaway, we get some sort of resolve or some peace or some, again, comprehension of what it was that occurred, and again, our relationship to that thing, whatever it was. So there's this beautiful sense of peace and resolve that we can obtain a better understanding of meaning just in general. And if we're going to really deeply and truly explore the nature of reality itself, we need to truly and really and deeply understand this question of why.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.